Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me well. We will wait a couple of minutes for everybody to join, seconds, I mean, and then I will start. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them in, but I will look at them at the end. So I will not try to answer those during the presentation. I think we are good to go. And so I will start. Good. Welcome, everybody. For my webinar, From Technical Debt to Competitive Advantage with Next-Gen Mobile Development. In the next hour, I'll show you how you can move from a technical debt, from mobile technical debt, to a situation where your apps actually become a competitive advantage without needing to choose between native quality and development speed. But before we start, let me introduce myself. I'm Rogier. I'm a solution architect at IO. I've spent the last 13 years helping banks, utility companies, healthcare organizations to build mobile-first architectures, often in very complex and heavy regulated environments. And at IO, this is good to mention, right? IO is an end-to-end digital agency. We work out of 5 countries. We have more than 2,000 employees and 1,500 clients. And it's good to mention that we are technology agnostic, which means that we build native apps, we build hybrid apps, we build web apps. So the purpose of this presentation is not really to say you need to do this or that. Right? There's no religious argument for one technology. But saying that, we have created an approach which we call the next-gen native approach, which I will explain in this presentation, which is also based on native development. So to kick off, mobile is becoming harder and more critical. This is of course not new, but if we go way back, then mobile was more of a nice-to-have channel next to your maybe web portal. But it's becoming more and more a core part of the digital ecosystem. So your app is very often the primary interaction for your customer, and in some cases even the only interaction with your customer. So it's harder because the environment around it also has become tougher, right? There's more regulation, there is higher security requirements, the platforms that the apps are built on are moving faster and faster, and more importantly, users that use apps generally do not accept a mediocre experience anymore. They expect you to be top tier. But at the same time, mobile also has become much more critical, right? As I mentioned, it is becoming the primary channel. It's used for impactful actions, so to do stuff in banking, in healthcare, and it's often very deeply integrated into your core systems. And thanks to strong identity and device binding, mobile is also very often the most trusted channel. So before, especially in banking, we had these hard token devices where we need to type some things in to do payments. And these days, payments are all done or approved through mobile because the platform is considered as being the most secure one. That means also that every choice you make in mobile has consequences that can hit also the entire chain. So today's agenda, let's see what we will be talking about. First, I will start with some real-world cases of mobile apps that we've built at scale in health and banking to set a little bit the stage. Then I will talk a little bit about why traditional mobile strategies get stuck into this technical debt where making releases gets more difficult and take more time. And then I will walk through our next-gen native approach and how to get started with that, how we approach building these kind of apps for scale in an architecture-first way, and also how we're using Kotlin multi-platform as a technical basis to do so. And then if I do my job well today, then after this webinar, you will know what is now on the slide. I will not go into detail now because I want to make sure that this slide comes back at the end, and then we can hopefully tick off all the things that I talked about. Good. So let's talk about these two cases that I prepared. And the first one is an app platform that we recently delivered for Achmea. For those who are unaware, Achmea is a market leader, health insurance and damage insurance company in the Netherlands. They have over 5 million customers in health alone, and they deliver their services through 8 different brands. And these brands are now on the screen. Maybe you are also a customer of these brands. Then you're at least part of the 5 million. And yeah, the case is about the online doctor platform apps that Achmea has. They were in a situation that maybe other organizations are also in. They have multiple brands, and each brand has their own app. And each of these apps has very similar functionality, but they are built differently, often also through different agencies, and each having also their own backend. And for Achmea, this led really to a lot of rising cost, and not only just cost, also security and privacy risks, because they had no control over the apps and their backends, because this was all at these agencies that also were building these and maintaining these backends. So something needed to change. So the challenge here was, how can we create a new and modular online doctor platform for them, where they can still have native apps, they can still have for each brand a separate app, each having their own look and feel, each having their own specific features, and all of that also in a new foundation that integrates with an identity and access management solution that Achmea has, to really make sure that this login and registration procedure in every app is the same, that they can switch to a chat and triage solution that is delivered by a third party, but again, every brand uses the same thing, and that they can leverage other providers and content from these providers, like for example, Thuisarts, to include this information in these apps. So the end goal was basically to take these 3 separate apps from 3 different suppliers and merge them into one platform. And that's exactly what we did for Achmea. So instead of rebuilding each of these apps, or maybe making updates to these apps to make them more come more together, we created a new platform for them. That platform was based on Kotlin multi-platform, where all the shared business logic between these apps were integrated. So things like authentication, about how the flow is going through the app, how the integration with the third-party chat and triage system is happening, how all these content providers like Thuisarts, but also how all the marketing tooling to measure is done. It's all built into the shared Kotlin multi-platform core. And on top of that, we kept native UIs for each of these apps. So iOS and Android still have their own native UI to make sure that the app feels performant and looks well. But still, branding, copy, and other flows, they were all based on configurations and separate per label. So each label has still had their own app and still had their own look and feel, but also their own functionalities in there. So basically, we could adapt per brand without having separate code bases there. So what did this enable for Achmea? So before, they had multiple doctor apps, each having their own code base. They had changes that they needed to be made to these apps. They needed to be duplicated across brands. The security and privacy risks, they were also spread out over these different agencies, and introducing new functionalities was slow and also expensive, because if they wanted to introduce something, they needed to do that 3 times over 3 different agencies. And now, with the efforts that we made, there is one shared Kotlin multi-platform core. We build the features in there once, and we make them available for all brands. The brands can still decide if they want to include certain things or not. Security and identity and access management is all centralized. And this is also audited and hardened once, and then it can be used also for all these other brands. And onboarding new brands is also going much faster, where maybe before that would take months to get a new brand on board. In our case now, that would be weeks. And the point here is, here we also enabled this next-gen native architecture-first approach that I will also go into a little bit deeper in a moment. But it shows how it can work in a regulated multi-brand health care environment without sacrificing complexity, cost, and risk over time. So that's one case. Then I want to move to another case. This is a long-term customer of ours already. It's a Rabobank and Orcobank. They are this is a bank in the Caribbean area, so that's Aruba, Curaçao, Bonaire, and Sint Maarten. They are relatively small. They have over 60,000 clients, but they have biggest market share on the island itself. So that's, and I'm speaking for Aruba. And they focus on retail and corporate banking for their customers. And here, the case is maybe a little bit similar than Achmea, but very different, right? Because we're now talking about banking and finance. So the starting situation before we started deploying a platform approach at Rabobank is that they work at different islands, right? And so they have different jurisdictions and regulatory requirements they need to comply to. They need to be modern to be competitive. And they were also dealing with a existing security solution that was very expensive for them. And they had to deal with a legacy core banking system that was restricting them. And the challenge for us basically was to deliver modern native apps for multiple countries with stronger security and modern customer engagement, and introduce also tooling to empower their marketing department with push notifications and marketing banners that can be shown in the apps. And similar to what we did at Achmea, we also created here a Kotlin multi-platform core. We even went a step further there. We created a actual banking platform that we use also for different banks. We call that Banking Right. And in there, it's the same principle, right? So all the business logic, but also everything related to security and device binding, it's all put in this Kotlin multi-platform core. So it's multi-label. So we have one code base, but we can have different variants per bank, even per country, to make sure that we can respect local branding and rules. And on the security side of things, we also created a package solution for device binding, and that's also all integrated in there. And on top of that, we also built a API middleware layer to make sure that we can shift all that business logic that was in the apps to more towards the API middleware. So again, looking back, what is has enabled this for the Rabobank and Orcobank? So initially, they had more of a point solution for the Rabobank. Orcobank did not even have an app at that time. What I mentioned, the security solution was rigid and expensive. On the backend side, the backend services were integrated very close to the core banking system. So there was not much domain logic in between. So a lot of business logic ended up in the apps themselves. And as a result, adding features and entering new markets was slow and came with a lot of risk and effort. And then with the new setup that we introduced, we created these pre-built banking components. It allowed us to create these apps relatively quickly. We added modern device binding solutions. They were also using hard tokens that are now decommissioned. So it's all through all the payment approvals are done through the apps. We added a API middleware layer to shift as much as possible business logic to the API and decouple the apps from the core banking system. And this made it also possible that we could easily introduce a new app for Orco Bank. And currently, we are still maintaining these two apps for them. So on the surface, Achmea and Aruba and Orco Bank, they are very different because one is about Dutch healthcare and the other one is about Caribbean banking. But the pattern that is between them is the same. So it's multiple brands. It's in a regulated environment. There is a deep backend integration. There's a complex landscape. There's a lot of pressure on cost and time to market. And these are exactly the conditions where a traditional mobile approach will start to crack. Because they will not be able to scale well, and they tend to create a lot of technical debt that if it's not addressed, it will just pile up, which means that you cannot really move very fast. And that's also the next topic that I want to talk about. So we will have a look at the traditional mobile development approaches and what trade-offs are made there. That's what I said. So what is this classic mobile trade-off? I don't think it's necessarily a mobile trade-off because it's a trade-off in general, right? So on the left side, we care about quality. We want to have a very secure solution. We want to have the perfect UX, and we want to stay aligned with everything that is happening new on the iOS and Android platform. And next to that, we also want to support as much like form factors as we can, right? And at the right side, we see the pressure. So we need to speed up. We have budget constraints. We are under time to market pressure, and we have a business that wants to keep experimenting and launching new ideas. So very often we need to choose, right? Either we choose to optimize for quality, security, and UX, and accept that things will be slower and expensive, or we optimize for speed and cost, and we know that we need to take some shortcuts that we need to pay for later. And if we look back at those two cases, so Achmea and Orco, they were also having they were into this situation that they needed to choose between these trade-offs. So let's have a look at how that happens. So the classic project trap, as I would say it, is that we ship the MVP fast. So there's a business challenge. Somebody has a good idea within the company. The goal is to get an MVP out as quickly, as cheaply as possible so that we can validate if it actually works for the audience. Because if it doesn't work, we don't continue. If it works, we continue. Which is a reasonable goal, but it also shapes the decision, right? So you rarely think about, okay, how would this app then scale, or whether it would be part, or it should be part of some kind of overall platform. So often these initiatives are also created through the business side of the company. They often also select an external party because internal development is considered slow. And IT, architecture, and security are involved very late in this whole process, or sometimes not even at all. So then you launch, the MVP works, you're successful, but then the real trouble starts, right? Because your customers, they want more. So there's growing demand, and users want more capabilities. The organization wants maybe more brands, more languages. They want to have a deeper integration into the rest of their digital ecosystem. And because you did not really design for scale, you keep stacking features on top of that architecture that was never meant to carry that load. Security and compliance requirements that were skipped for speed, now they come back as gaps. And vendor or agency choices start also to lock you in. And there was not really a moment in time where you looked back at your architecture and revisited the choices you made. You're just trying to keep up with all the new requests that come in. So you're successful in terms of adoption, but you are also tied to an architecture that was never meant for long-term growth. And yeah, to be clear, right, there's nothing wrong with this MVP approach, right? So it's a very useful way to validate whether a ID has traction. But the problem that we see in practice is that an MVP implementation quietly becomes the long-term product, and even sometimes the basis for apps that come after that. without revisiting the architecture. And this is exactly the point where technical debt starts to build up. And an app that was built for speed and learning, the MVP approach ends up having to carry all the long-term requirements that come afterwards. And so this is also how you notice a little bit if your mobile portfolio is stuck, right? Operationally, you will see that you get more bugs, more incidents, more P1 incidents, for example. Your releases get harder and harder. It takes more time to get features out. The next one longer than the other one. And you need to repeat the same work for every app and brand and platform if you are in a multi-platform or multi-brand setup. Very often you also see that security risks and issues, they end up being discovered very late, very often when pen tests or audits are being done. So you're not really well prepared for that. And strategically, you can't really respond fast enough to the demands of the user because you're basically held back by this aging architecture that takes very long to implement features on. And when major platform changes come, so we've seen that recently with iOS 26, they become very big projects. And every time we are talking about something needs to change, we need to rebuild the apps, and you keep on doing this every year or every couple of years. So you're refactoring almost constantly. And if we're talking about multi-brand or even multi-country requirements, if they pop up, then this feels very often like a rebuild of your whole app. So at this point, mobile is becoming a cost and a risk, and not really a competitive advantage. So when you look at this pattern across across organizations, we see a few root causes coming up back. So we treat mobile initiatives as individual projects instead of seeing them as a platform. Early decisions we make are purely based on speed, and we trade away architecture, security, and compliance. We think as per app functionality instead of thinking about, okay, what can we share? So think about shared capabilities so that we don't need to duplicate things between apps. And responsibility for the architecture often sits with external parties rather than some kind of joint stable platform that is being thought about. And just to emphasize again, right, MVPs are not bad, but if an MVP is successful, there needs to be a very conscious moment in time where you decide, do we harden this MVP into a proper platform, or do we keep piling up features on a quick prototype? Skipping that step is basically what turns MVPs into long-term technical debt. And to break the pattern, we need to change how we think about mobile. We need to treat it as a platform and not a set of projects. And that's also what I want to talk about a little bit further next. This is what we call architecture first design. And when we talk about architecture first design, we're talking not about let's think for a couple of months about making a design and then start building. No, we talk about architecture first design. We say before we actually start building an app, we design a platform to build these apps on. And in the traditional project first way, we would start with an ID. We build quickly. We let the architecture evolve with each feature. And every new app, brand, or market becomes a new project with its own stack and its own problems. When we talk about architecture first, we start from a mobile vision, right? From a platform blueprint. We identify the capabilities as best as we can that should be shared across apps and brands. And we think about, okay, how do we deal with security, authentication, and analytics, and how do we do that in a very consistent way throughout our app? And we build those into a platform. And then individual apps and brands, they become a platform, they become products on the platform itself. And yes, it will take a little bit longer to start and to get your first app out. But everything after that becomes also much more predictable. And that's also what we say. First, delivery becomes more predictable. You're not reinventing the basic components that every app needs to have for every project. The cost per app and brand drops. Instead of rebuilding the same capabilities over and over, you reuse basically what is already built into the platform. The security and compliance, it becomes more of a built-in aspect. How you handle authentication and identity management, how you do logging, how you do audits, how you do pen tests. It all becomes much more standardized. And lastly, changes can also become much more faster because it's a much safer environment to roll out features in. Not every release becomes a very frightening experience because a lot of issues can roll out of it, because you keep this platform also up to date and hardened for whatever comes in the future. So in other words, mobile stops becoming a series of one-off projects and becomes a strategic capability. And this brings me also to this approach that I started off with, how we build at IO apps for certain customers. And that's what we call next-gen native. And when I say next-gen native, I don't just mean we choose Kotlin multi-platform to build our apps, because Kotlin multi-platform is more of a technology choice. What we say next-gen native is really a way of building native mobile apps on top of a shared and architecture-first platform, where we use Kotlin multi-platform to share a lot of logic of the apps between iOS and Android. Specifically when we're talking about business logic and security and integration and analytics. We still build native UIs, so using Compose or Swift UI to make sure that we use the native capabilities where it matters most, and where we can share, we will share. And crucially also, we design our apps to be more of a platform. And it doesn't matter if it's a multi-brand approach or if it's just a single app. Like treating something as a platform makes sure that you standardize functionalities within your app to make sure that it can scale much easier also to increasing demand. And we created 6 pillars where we design basically on how we build our apps. And it starts with this Kotlin multi-platform architecture. So Kotlin multi-platform is something that launched a couple of years ago. It allows us to build functionality in the Kotlin language. Kotlin language originally used to make Android apps. But anything that is written in Kotlin multi-platform can be shared directly to an iOS app and directly to an Android app. So that means that a lot of logic that is in that layer or that core, how we often call it, will be accessible by both platforms. And we have used that knowledge of Kotlin multi-platform to create a little bit of a pre-built architecture. And that pre-built architecture is something that we use for all our apps to accelerate the building of the app that we would do for that customer. So that base architecture we use for Rabobank and Orcobank, but also for Achmea, but also for other customers where we make apps for. So it really accelerates development. So secondly, we also have package solutions that basically extend on that Kotlin multi-platform base. That's what I mentioned, this banking right that has really these tailored components that are about banking in there. So that when we build banking apps, we don't need to reinvent the basics, because how a payment screen looks like or how a login screen looks like is very often very similar. So we can already deliver these out of the box. The platform of the basis that we set is also multi-brand and white label supported, which means that we can easily design and configure multiple apps on this same architecture. We focus also a lot on automated and AI-driven testing within this platform to make sure that we keep the quality high, even if you scale your app, you make it bigger or you add multiple brands to it. We make sure that the load of testing does not go much higher, because we make sure that an AI bot is actually doing the testing for you. And then security by design is built-in, and built-in compliance is very important. So the security measures that are part of the platform are not bolted on at the end. They are really part of the beginning. So they're there in day one. And lastly, we focus a lot on integration API excellence. So it's not really related to the apps, but very often we create an API middleware layer to support the apps in communicating with DXP systems or legacy core backend systems. So altogether, these 6 pillars, they form our next-gen native approach that we use at our customers. So where would this fit amongst your options? And here, of course, it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because as I said in the beginning, I don't really want to go into saying what technology is best. But I cannot avoid having a slide like this in here. So let's lay it out. So we have on the far left side, we have full native per platform, and there are still very valid situations where you create a pure native platform. For example, when you have highly specialized apps with very specific hardware needs, or if you're targeting a single brand and with these same needs. But the trade-off is, of course, you will have 2 separate teams working on this. You have separate code bases, and for sure, this will be a higher cost over time. And then in the middle, we have hybrid web-based solutions, also very popular. We think that it is very good to employ these when you have a lot of content. So you have content-heavy apps, or where you have relatively simple apps and not very complex or multi-label apps. Or when you want to reuse a lot of the web content and skill that you already have within your organization. So not just only content, but also skill, right? If you have a lot of skilled developers that are good in TypeScript, for example, it could be very wise to look into, for example, build with React Native. The trade-offs are known, right? There is limited access to device features. You need to be kept up to date with latest iOS and Android functionalities, often lagging behind. You need to have some trade-offs. You will have some trade-offs in UX and performance. And then the next-gen native approach, that's what we employ often, is where that's what we choose when mobile is very strategic and long-lived. So when you expect the app to evolve for years, when regulations and security matters a lot, when it has to deeply integrate into your landscape, and that often includes multi-brand and multi-country situations, but also single-brand apps with a long-term strategic roadmap could be very useful for this. In these kind of contexts, you want native UX and performance, but you cannot afford duplicate effort and inconsistencies in your security or integrations. And when you can share up to 60% of your logic in a shared core, and you can start treating mobile as a platform where it really starts paying off. Next, we will zoom in a little bit on a couple of these pillars. I touched it already a little bit on this. So we have this pre-built Kotlin multi-platform architecture and reusable components, where we can really accelerate the apps that we are building while providing a platform-like solution. And mentioned already, and sometimes we even take it a step further by making the platform even market specific, so in the banking domain. And something else to add to Kotlin multi-platform. So at one end, right, it allows us to share a lot of this logic, but it also gives us a lot of flexibility. And that's what I kind of try to visualize here with this slider. So we can say, for example, we only want to share business logic, but we can also share UI elements. We can also make a fully cross-platform app with it. So where it makes sense for us to use Kotlin multi-platform, we would do it. So very often we revolve a little bit around this model. So it's not only business logic, but it also includes a lot of view logic in there. So how your view operates. But we've also had instances where we create UI, and that's done through Compose multi-platform, where UI is created once and is also shared between iOS and Android. But we make the decisions where it makes most sense. And then, of course, security and compliance built into the platform. So in a lot of organizations, security compliance are still handled per app and per projects, right? So every new app needs to negotiate with the security department on how they are doing authentication and cryptography and logging, and every project will need to fill in these big Excel sheets where they say what they do and what they don't do. And very often this is done at the end of the project, where somebody asks, okay, this is what we built. Can security please sign off on this? But in our approach, we make sure that this is really done at the start and built into the platform, and only then you start building your app onto it. So very core security concerns is on how we authenticate and how we do device binding. It's really big built in. And the big advantage there is just consistency, because all the apps you have, they inherit all the same security requirements. And when vulnerabilities are discovered, you fix it in the platform, and then you push your new versions of your platform to the apps that are using the platform. And that can be done within your organization, or in our case, when, for example, we look at our banking platform, we fix it in there, and then we push it to all the customers that are using our banking platform. And this also makes compliancy and audits also much more manageable. So very often when we do pen tests at our customer, and the pen test is being done by a third party, then very often there is not really a remark coming out of these pen tests, because the platform already went through a numerous amount of pen tests. And we keep making sure that the platform is up to date. So you reduce very much also the security debt during development, right? So because when something changes, you can also you can respond in a controlled and a consistent way across your entire mobile portfolio, instead of you need to chase every app and every vendor that is built an app around this. So another thing that is also part of the next-gen native approach is that we put a lot of value into consistent UX and making sure that it is high quality without slowing down. And to do this, we put a lot of effort into UX automation. So we work with Figma at I/O, where we create designs. From these designs, we create a design system. That's pretty common these days. So the designs are made with these, it's also mentioned here, with these dimensions and colors and assets, very often also called tokens. And these tokens are then used by the app developers to create a consistent UX. And what we do is we put our own tooling in between that automatically takes all these tokens and creates a Kotlin code from it. And this makes it's possible that when changes are made in our Figma design system, that we can automatically pull them into the app, and also make sure that it is consistent between all the multi-brand apps that we make. And we do the same also for our multi-language support. Here we work with a tool that's called Localize. And again, same principle here. You have multiple languages in the app, and we automatically import that into our apps. And on the testing side of things, I already mentioned it, right? So we have AI-driven agents. They run through all the user journeys repeatedly, and they check for visual regressions in layout and in branding before we actually go to a release. Because especially when you scale over multiple brands, the load of testing becomes bigger and bigger, because you need to validate each brand and see if there was no regression there with the changes that you've made. Right, so this also lets you increase the release frequency, but without sacrificing UX consistency and stability. So the final thing I want to mention here is that if you want your mobile app to be more than a feature factory, You need to make sure that you do good measurements, and you need to create the ability to experiment safely. And this is especially something we did at Achmea, where we created a standardized way for event tracking across apps and brands to make sure that the behavior is very comparable between them. And then we connect this single instrumentation pattern to various analytics and marketing tools. You see a couple mentioned here in the slide, to make sure that they can measure and experiment to their own ability. And on top of that, very important also is that we work with feature flags to make sure that we can gradually roll out new functionality, especially when functionality has a high impact on backend systems. We can gradually introduce it to the customers, get some feedback before doing a full rollout, or maybe rolling it back when something is going wrong. And all this together enables what we call value-based development. So you can see real usage and outcome data and decide based on that what to do next, which feature to expand, which ones to stop investing in because they don't deliver value. So the platform gives you means to leverage, it gives you the levers basically to measure, experiment, and change course over the lifetime of the app, instead of relying on usage assumptions. So then we are going to check how it all comes together in practice. So from your first project to a mobile platform. So even if you have only one app today, the path towards a mobile platform looks very similar. You first assess and envision your existing app. You check your key user journeys. You check whether it's currently slowing you down in terms of cost, risk, or speed. And based on that, you define a mobile vision. What should this app do? And what should potential future app do? And what should they enable? And then you start to design the architecture. You define all the capabilities it should have, if it should be part of a shared platform layer. You look at security, authentication, all the integrations you do of backends. You look at the analytics you are having, your UX patterns that you can reuse, and the configurations that you need. And on top of that, that's of course our approach, is that you define this Kotlin multi-platform basis, where you start putting all these shared capabilities in. And then the third step is to start building or maybe even migrating the first app onto this platform. That can be basically mean that you can refactor your current technical debt heavy app into a new core, or you can just immediately build the next version onto this platform. And in production, you can then start proving if it delivers on performance, security, and maintainability. And from there, you can evolve and extend basically. So new features are extended by are added by extending the platform instead of patching the app. And in the future, if you need additional apps or channels or brands, you already have the foundation in place to do so. So even if you have one app today, treating it as the first product on the platform makes it easier to live with it now and keeps your options also open for later. And also, especially if you look at the economics of it, where in the traditional approach that every major mobile initiatives behaves like a new project, that can be introducing a second app or a big rewrite of your existing app, or launching complex new features or going into a new market. Each one comes with an architecture decision, its own integration, and its own security and compliancy work. And cost and complexity in the traditional approach almost grows linearly as your mobile scope expands, right? So even when you're having a single app, it becomes harder and more expensive to evolve as technical debt starts building up. Where you would expect that over time, your team gets more experienced, the domain knowledge gets more comfortable, you would be able to speed up. But if your architecture does not really support that, it just keeps on being more difficult to introduce new things. And with a platform approach, you invest more upfront, right, in this shared mobile core. with all these security and integration and UX patterns in that. But after that, when you start introducing new features or you start expanding into new markets or creating additional brands on top of it, you start reusing this foundation. And security and compliance are validated once the platform level are validated at the platform level and reused. And over the lifetime of your mobile product, the cost of change goes down instead of up. So even if you have just one key app today, right, treating it as the first product, as I mentioned on the platform, pays off, right? Because over time you will see that your development speed and your speed to deliver to the end customer will increase. So how can you get started with this? So first, we talked about it. You need to map your mobile landscape. You need to identify the shared capabilities. You need to spot the opportunities between the platforms. And very important also, align business and IT on a mobile vision. And so in the traditional approach, what we see often is that the business part of the company goes ahead because going through IT takes too long. But creating a mobile vision is something that business and IT needs to agree on to make sure that mobile apps are built as a platform and not just as individual projects. And then finally, make sure to pick one high impact pilot app where long-term evolution and security and complexity and integration really matters. You don't need to rebuild everything at once, but you need to start thinking into platforms to be successful. And of course, you can always call us to help you define that vision or to accelerate your development with the pre-built architectures that we've made ourselves. We can help you with various services. We can spar. We can do simple scans. We can build full strategies and architectures and do roadmaps for you. And then we come back to, oh, I missed this one, but I already mentioned that. And we come back to our slide we also started off with. And hopefully I did my best to explain these things to you. So first, let's summarize that and get some takeaways from it. So how do we break the speed versus quality trade-off? So we said that we make sure that we stop treating an app as separate projects, but invest in a architecture-first platform with a shared core to make sure that we can increase the quality, security, and we can move faster in our delivery. Then second, we talked about architecture first design. So we said architecture first means that designing a reusable mobile platform is important before starting with individual apps. We create this platform so that we can put shared capabilities on top. We think about security and UX patterns to make sure that we can do predictable delivery and create a mobile landscape that can actually scale. Now, we talked a little bit about how we use Kotlin multi-platform to actually enable this architecture-first design and how we created a next-gen native approach. We also saw at Aruba and Orco where we also employ this core, this Kotlin multi-platform core to accelerate their development. So we looked at some strategies to prevent technical debt and costly migration, right? And this was very much a story about where the typical MVP-driven path leads to technical debt if it's not addressed correctly. And that moving towards more a platform-first strategy with these shared components and clear separation between what is core and configuration and a roadmap that evolves into a platform is important. We talked about why security by design and built-in compliance is essential already from day one, especially when vulnerabilities pop up, that you can fix them fast and you can ship them to all the different apps that you have on your platform, and there the benefit really counts. And finally, this is also where we started off with our presentation. We looked at some practical examples, cases in complex enterprise environments. We saw Achmea, we saw Rabobank, we saw Oracle Bank, and we saw that that the approach that we have it works in a regulated healthcare and banking environment, in a multi-brand environment with very legacy systems. And we saw a little bit the how to get started steps in the end, where we say, okay, assess your landscape, design the architecture, and start building or migrating your existing app into a platform approach so that you can scale and that you're not stuck with technical debt that is holding you back. And that was it. I hope that it was all clear. And there is also a room for a couple of questions. So if you have any questions, or maybe you already asked some questions, you can put that in the chat. I don't see any questions yet. That should mean that I did a understandable story. Okay. Then I think we are done. Then I want to thank everybody for attending, taking the time to listen to me. There will be also a recording of this. So if you have at any point you want to look back to it, that's possible. If you have any further questions that pop up maybe later, you can reach out to me. You see my email here also on the slide. And again, if you have situations that are very comparable to what I explained, we can think along. Also, on a strategy point of view, we can also build solutions for you, whatever is suitable. Then thank you, everybody. I will end the event here. And again, thanks for attending.